Ooparts are out of place artifacts. OOP art, that's where we get it from. And it's not necessarily art, and it doesn't have to necessarily be exactly an artifact. A good example is you find a squared off piece of stone, and of course, that's not a new part. But you find where 2.6 million of them are stacked up into an exact pyramid, lined up with true north, and doesn't have a deviation of less than a quarter of an inch. That's a new part. So there's one huge example. But whenever you see the bowls that the Egyptians made, and you're like, how could you make that bowl? It'd be hard for people to make that bowl today, and yet here they are. And you don't see 1,000 broken ones from them trying it. You don't see any broken ones, really, rarely at all. And it just makes you wonder, what the hell was all this about? They have a simple pottery and a simple art system that just looks archaic, and then the next thing you know, they've got it stepped up to a high level. Well, during that time, the Sumerians had already stepped up their game. Kind of shows you where they come from. Now, let's do a linking thing here real quick and talk about a few things, put a few things together, and then I'll show you a new part, another one that's been found. But looking at these ancient languages like this, okay, this is what would be known as a phonetic type language. And we look at that from the Phoenicians. They had taken other people, and it looks like it had helped them develop a language and an understanding by simplistically figuring out that their words could be made from the letters of the first of the pictures of the ideograms. Sure, somebody knew this is upside down, but knew what a head looked like, or a button, or a sword, or a man that's running, or whatever. And say you have these um, words that you have built up, and now you're trying to write a word down, and so you use the first letters. A good example of this is something we still use today in the military. If you're aware or watched any military movies and stuff, you hear people talking in a strange language trying to spit out letters. Instead of saying, giving out letters, they give out words for those letters. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, XO, you know, Echo, Foxtrot, Hotel, India, Golf. It goes on. Um, Anyhow, these words are different, but they have them in the police too, whenever they call out your license plate number nowadays. And of course, this was for people couldn't get a correct communication across. You couldn't quite hear what they were saying sometimes over these archaic radios at hard distances and things like that. And so if they said a word like hotel or India or November, you kind of knew what that was. And whenever they spit that word out at you, you're like, okay, that's an N. This is, and you can figure it out. And so it's phonetic, originating from the idea of the Phoenicians, where it looks like in their trade they went to all these people and it taught them things. And so you look at something like this, and here's an animal skin and a head, and what looks like an old lyre or a harp, and here's a feather, here's a joint. And so you can look at things like this and say, well, this is a head, so that's he, and then that's a button, so that's buh, and then that's an atlatl, so that's and this is a running man, so that's and then this is a union of two joints here, and so that's oo, and so that's Hebrew. That's Hebrew right there. Well, no, actually, it's not. In their language, head wasn't the word head. That's not a button. That's not an atlatl, but that's a badass sword. If you look at the sword, imagine a sword that has the middle part running up, but then it has like leaves hanging off of it that are sharpened also. That could probably cause a hellish amount of damage. And it looks like one of the elder obsidian weapons that they had, where it was really made of wood with chunks of sharpened obsidian stuck into it from the sides. And this devastating weapon here, that back in the time when all they had really was before that were blunt weapons and maces. Egypt is famous for their maces. Macedonia is Mace Edonia, right? And all the Sumerians, they had maces, and a lot of these are ceremonial maces. Even Narmer had this ceremonial mace done, so you can tell back in that time that was the way that they did things. But it went on from there. Anyhow, this phonetic, though, it's kind of shown up as being like that. So hopefully y'all can understand whenever you see some of these things that it's a phonetic type writing. Now, the first people to have exhibited this are the Sumerians, where they had an ideogram writing that they show. Then they turned that ideogram writing into a phonetic writing like this of ideograms. And then that quickly evolved into another subset, which really bore almost no resemblance anymore to this at all. And then instead of coming up with simplistic letters for each of the sounds, which is what the Phoenicians' incredible thing was, they ended up making cuneiform, which was simplistic. Instead of having to be able to be an artist to even override it, all you got to do is use a triangle stick and you've got it. And slight variations on a theme, but just like today when we write things, I can tell what you're writing usually. You can tell what I've wrote and so on. Cursive can be quite hard, but when somebody prints, you should easily be able to tell what these letters are. When somebody draws little pictures, you should easily be able to tell what they are. But if somebody can't draw a head or a horse and everything too good, then they wouldn't be too good of a communicator, would they? So weird things come out of this, but just want to show you this other Oopart, because there's a lot of them around the world where you find like screws stuck in stone, and the famous London hammer here in Texas where it's vitrified into a stone itself, a man-made hammer stuck in Cretaceous rock. Even this looks like a computer chip type thing that's been stuck into a rock that's built, and the schist bowl, which if you look isn't quite even, but they give you a bunch of strange ideas on what this thing could be. But the idea of having carved that in the first place, these plain looking effigies that they tell you are bugs, and just bugs. These are Ooparts. So now we're going to look at one associated with StoneHenge. One thing I'd like to show you is that there's a lot of, whenever you get up above something all of a sudden now, or use like, LiDAR, you can tell there's a lot of things going on that you never knew you never knew. And look at this circle here, and this circle here, and this circle here, and this circle here. And even though they've made a walkway through here, look at the crap that they're doing it right over the top of and the back of, and people are just walking over the top of it. There's got to be something in there. And you can tell at ancient times they had an egress that came from here and ran through and ran out here. Yet when they put the road in, they ran through here, come over here, and go out there. Why? I don't know. But anyhow, and it's odd, but people have noticed now whenever the shadows extend at just the right times of the year, there's all this phallic and sexual symbols that are made out of the shadows, over and above the idea that they also point towards astronomical sites and things like that too. And it just keeps getting more and more interesting. But a place, less than 2 miles from here, that they have found is going to show us our Oopart this time. Not that StoneHenge itself isn't an Oopart in itself, all by itself, but stone circles have been known by people. It was an Oopart quite a bit in one time. But here's where it tells you that it casts phallic shadows, part of the fertility play that they have going on certain times of the year. I'm not going to show you a video with the ideas of them doing that. Oh, maybe I'll make one down the road, but it's a neat thing that they've shown here. These people mimicking out the 100 out of their symbology. And you can see all of these things they've now figured out where all of these stones line up to and its configurations, and that it couldn't have been, it's not a guesswork thing, people. These people knew exactly what was hooked up to what, and then they had made other configurations that lined up, and then they made them all line up together due to the expanse of the circle. You see what I'm saying? Where they had, you can line up something 3 foot apart, 5, 10, 15 foot apart, but if you want to line up 30 things, you have to spread these circles out and then say, here's the lineage, there's the lineage, and everything. And this has to be worked out well in advance. Don't think these people scooted around stones and you had somebody going, no, a little to the left, and people would be pissed. It didn't work like that. It didn't work like that. And that concept itself is a new part. But let's go on. Oh, by the way, I'm going to steal one of the StoneHenge triathlons just because I want one. We're going to put it out here in the front yard for Halloween, and we are going to give it back. Okay? But just going to keep it for Halloween and then back for StoneHenge. Nobody pay any attention. Just kidding. That was a replica stone, so then they're trying to show you how they could have moved those things along the ground. Well, let's look at this place. This is called Bush Barrow. It's in Normanton Down, less than 2 miles away from there. And what they found in there are these odd artifacts that are hooked up to some type of druidic shaman. Now, look at this knife that's here. And even though this thing has been in burial for this amount of time, how the idea of the knife is, this is a bronze knife. And it is just really eroded away pretty bad. But actually, for bronze, for being this old, is really in good shape, don't you think? Well, look at these rivet sets they made on this. And how this collapses into this knife. And there's both sides of it. And then they band this together. And that holds onto the knife blade in this strange way. You see this? This technology of holding a lock blade situation. Kind of like people have a lock blade now. And the little pin you use to flick it open. This isn't a lock blade or a flip open at all. Look at the little minute holes that have been put along this thing for God knows what reason. But these minute holes, exactly the same on one side as they are the other, and they are much smaller than a needle. A needle barely fits through this hole here. It's a ceremonial dagger hand size. But then you look at the handle of this thing, and oh my gosh, how is it kept in that good of shape during all this time? And it seems to be a treated piece of wood in some way, shape, or form. Or is this like ivory? Well, it's listed as wood. But, wow. Okay, that's kind of Ooparty. Okay, well, it gets worse. They found all this stuff with him here. And this looks like a buckling or a clasping type mechanism they have here, right? And then the other one has, it seems like a divot cut into it that's wide like this. And you could snap or latch it into it. Be kind of neat. Now, here's a weird rod that's shown here that apparently had these mace heads that are on it here. There's no carving on the mace heads, but this mace head was on it, and there's an extra one there. And these are made out of marble and smoothed off perfectly, kind of like the rocks used to beat up diorite things back in the day in Egypt and Samaria. But they're here in this mound right next to StoneHenge. Now, the shaman staff here shows these weird icon things going around it, and they're made of silver. Okay, so they have separate mining and things going on. All this is solid gold. This is silver, but they look like lightning. Tell me they don't look like they're supposed to be depicting some type of, some type of lightning concept going around this. A non-uniform zigzag for some reason that's going around this, right? It looks like there's your lightning rod, if you will. And the neatest thing, though, they found is another ceremonial dagger they found here has this. This is what's in concern here. They have this little gold foil filigree thing on the edge of it on the side of a knife handle. When you look at this thing closely, it's made up of micro rivets like this, almost like that mithril chainmail type thing that you'd see. Now the oddity here is that what you're looking at is that each one of these little dots here are smaller around than a pencil lead. Under each one is a pin, as if it is a golf tee, that is smaller than a human hair made out of gold. And they have had a pre-drilled hole into the artifact before them, and then they are set in there with bitumen. And there are literally thousands of them on one chunk. They said there are 44,000 of them and over 140,000 of these beads on that handle alone. And now we're looking at this through a near microscope, or we're looking at it through a magnifying glass right now. to be able to look at this. I don't know how to describe how small these dots are. Let's see if we can get some perspective on this, but there's an oddity hooked up to the idea of what they have going along with this. You can see them going around this handle here, and they appear to be in somewhat of a scale pattern, okay? So it looks like chainmail or scale. Giving an example of scale here on this, though, a needle, round needle that you normally use, not the littlest needle I can find, no, a common needle is 6 times wider here at the base around than these are. And the post that runs into them, if you look at them standing up here like a forest, the post that runs into them is less than the width of a human hair, and they're all cut off uniformly somewhat around less than, just slightly less than a millimeter. So what we're looking at here is micro. We're zoomed in on something that's the size of your pinky. And think about this, at the end of your pinky, you have stuck into the end of your pinky over 3,000 little quills that are in there in just that little piece. Now, at one time, this whole thing was covered because there's little pieces everywhere, and they can tell it just kind of eroded away. But that is it's a freak out on how someone could possibly see that small. I'll show you another thing, too, where they have figured out that this is a calendar. That along these sidelines here, there are little dots that go through. And if you count this up, it equals up to being exactly what a lunar calendar would be, minus 11 days, which I've explained to you before is the reason for September 11th. And when the calendar, you see it's 11. If you use a lunar calendar, you're 11 days short of being a full exact year, so you have to add 11 onto it. Well, whenever you do this triangulation that zigzags right here, when you start it from, I believe it's this corner here, and you go, the next one is 11 off. Okay, the next one is 11 off, 11 off, 11 off. They go off that. So what's the lines on 12? Doesn't that sound familiar to us all? And there's a whole correlation hooked up with this where they've realized that this is a calendar set on a moon calendar made to make a lunar out of a moon calendar, or to make it an entire physical year, like whenever it comes around exactly, you're 11 days off. It's an oddity of just the dots that are in here. And the symbolism, somebody could find in something as simple as this, which just seemed to look like a little chest plate type thing that was put on with him, but it's not. It's definitely not. And they show these measurements here that show you that that's not there. Well, someone has correlated this, and I'll try to show it to you at the end of the video. There's the buckle thing, but the neatest thing they found is this and the calendar. This, though, they don't know how that's made. So, oddly enough, what they've come to say is that it must have been made by children. I don't know if you remember whenever you were a kid, you felt like you could look at something real close and you could see real small. And of course, big people versus small people, you could just make small things. So they're saying they're probably made by children. Of course, so this lended people to say that they're made by fairies. The little people came and they made the fairies. They made these things, but how did they make this? And look at the linearness of it, the intricacy of it all. And this was all supposed to be just a ceremonial dagger. If you held on to where this was and used it in any way, like trying to jab somebody, all these little gold things would have probably come off in your hand. This is just a ceremonial swirling on the handle of a dagger, something that simple, and something that was probably never supposed to have been seen again ever at all. This is the way that it looked in situ, or the burial itself once found. And they show you here what that shaman looked like, kind of, and they have a small exhibit here. You look at the lines of that and how it well goes together. Here's a dish with a lot of those rivets sitting inside of it. So here's the mathematical geometry that they found that allowed them to realize that this must be a calendar or something in some way. They just started looking at it geometry-wise, and it didn't lay out quite correctly. And so they looked at this, and you can see that if you centered it on the corner and ran around, that your second ring would run through long, your third one would run through short, and right here between that and that is 11 dots on this thing, right? Or, and so utilizing that, it gets longer and longer of a wave. And this was allowed them to set up, okay, well, this is a moon, this is the scale, this is the moon. It makes you wonder, why didn't they just use the other scale and say that was a year? Well, that would be going through months and things. This is tabulating the moons, and they can watch that so they can constantly verify it going on. The other one, we're just kind of willy-nilling it for a year and then trying to catch it at the end and going, yeah, and once you figure out 365 days and then you go from there, of course, a leap year will throw you off one. It's said that the ancient Hebrews, just in one small segment of their period of time, that they were off by 73 years. Somebody figured out mathematically because of leap year, the one day that you would miss, that they had moved all the way around. And that's the reason that they were actually in September and at the wrong time of the season to pull off the thing that's supposed to happen at the end of the year. And everyone else had the end of year calendar. They said they had the end of year calendar, and their calendar wasn't quite at the end of the year. It said it's September. There's some conjecture that goes along with that, but anyhow, this plating here is quite a neat piece. But the other piece that is in there is just as unique, if not more neat. Okay, so here's a look at what they found and how this shows the seasons and how this is the calendar I'm speaking of. They talk about how this goes the section for the winter solstice and that each line equals out to an equinox, right? If you place this at north here, you have the summer solstice line that happens, right? And each one of these are degrees which correspond to each one of these lines. Now, here's a weird one for you. If you were to stand at a certain place in Stonehenge and look at this and look across the thing, you would know what's going to happen between each one of your pillars at a certain time. It's not a map of it. This is a map of what's happening in the sky, and you should be able to look at it and go, okay, well, then tomorrow or the next day, this star should come up right in between these two pillars, because it says that it does, and then it does. So this is the weird symbolism they have behind this. And somebody has broken this down and went far off in left field with it. I don't want to get into it necessarily, but quite a unique find, and in a new part, quite distinctly something that's not just a fine piece of gold work, which is an Oopart for you saying, well, these people were somewhat barbaric, but they built this Stonehenge, but they're kind of ugh. But look at this knowledge in their gold work, and then it has a calendar too. Just symbolically shows you, and look, it's all based on geometry, and it's symmetrical. It's out of symmetry symmetrically, and it's out of symmetry equals a lunar to solar calendar effect. And this is the exhibit that they have associated with it, and it shows you the mace head down here and the dagger that they had, the clasp, and his chest piece, and kind of what he would look like there. They also found an ancient axe handle with it, and it shows you this duck-headed axe handle, this axe beak axe handle, right? Also this huge piece of pottery and its intricate weaving on the side of it, which in itself is somewhat of an Oopart for the area, but not so much. And it's a cauldron. That's another reason they want to associate this with a shaman. It's a cauldron and the witches and Stonehenge and things that go along with that. And this season of Halloween, it sure does go with it. Anyhow, guys, enjoy. Like, share, and subscribe. More information comes in, more comes to you. Enjoy.